Hello, welcome to another edition of Tickle Trunk of Horrors. You're here with Timothy and Alexandria.
Hello, everybody.
And so today we got a very special guest, Ray Grasse, or Grasse, however he pronounces it. I'm not really sure. But he is very well known in the world of astrology. And he's written several books on the universe, astrology, etc. And I'm looking forward to talking with Ray because I have some questions about the Stargates and what happens with burnt out stars. As I was listening to an interview from a guy who works for NASA not too long ago, and he said that when a star burns out, it creates a miniature black hole. So I'm kind of interested to see what Ray thinks about that. And so some of the books by Ray is Stargates, An Infinity of Gods, Signs of the Times, The Waking Dream, Under a Sacred Sky, and Urban Mystic. And so, yeah, he's definitely written a lot of books on the topic.
And it's also interesting to know, and we'll kind of discuss this more with Ray, and it says that he's an internationally known astrologer, having worked for over 30 years with clients around the world in helping them gain greater insight into their lives and personalities. And somebody is quoted as saying that Ray is one of the world's greatest and most accurate astrologers. So we'll be more talking about that more, and as we have Ray join us in the show. But again, I'm sort of interested in hearing about Stargates myself. I've always had an interest in astrology and Stargates as well.
Sorry folks, y'all might have just heard me opening a vanilla Pepsi. So yeah. So yeah, in one of his books that he talks about, he talks about the return of Pluto and the search for Planet X. So yeah, those are some good topics. As you know, the show is called Tickle Trunk of Horrors, but we cover many different things, like horror movies or actual horror, real life hauntings, exorcisms, astrology. For some people, that can be considered a topic of horror right there. And here he comes. He's calling right now, so let's do this. Hello, Ray. Welcome to the Tickle Trunk of Horror show. You're here with Timothy and Alexandria. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
We're doing good. We had some computer glitches, and it's very frustrating, but right now we're doing good. Yeah, I've been looking forward to talking to you because you've written several books concerning astrology, and one of them has the title Stargates. I want to get into that, but before I get into that, I was listening a couple of weeks ago to a gentleman that works for NASA, and he was talking about burnt out stars, and he was saying once a star burns out, the star actually leaves a miniature, what he calls a miniature black hole. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, if there's enough mass in the star, it'll collapse down. I mean, I don't think this happens to every star, but I think there are certain dimensions involved that can collapse down into a black hole, and then black holes can merge, and it's, I'm not sure what you're asking in terms of, yeah, I'm familiar with the idea if that's what you're asking.
Well, I'm more interested in, like, the black holes, like, okay, because when you think of black holes, you think of, I don't have an understanding, I don't think anybody does of it, where they lead to.
Well, that's the age-old, well, not age-old, but that's the question that a lot of people are asking. Are they portals into other dimensions? Are they, the laws of physics break down in black holes? Time changes dramatically in black holes. It's, there's a lot of mystery surrounding black holes. I do think that they have some kind of profound significance. We're not quite sure what they are. I don't think astrologers know exactly what they mean yet in terms of where they fall in the horoscope. They do think there's a gigantic black hole at the center of our galaxy, and you can calculate where that is in the chart. I think it's certainly, at the very least, it's a point of mystery in the chart, in the horoscope. And I think that they're profoundly mysterious. I remember one of my teachers making the comment in passing one day. This mystic I studied with named Shelley Trimmer. He made a. I wasn't a fan of Doctor Who, but I didn't really watch it. But he said that the black holes are like the TARDIS, I think it's called in Doctor Who. He said that they're larger on the inside than the outside, which I thought was interesting. You know, the TARDIS that Doctor Who would go into to transport him was big when you got inside. And he said the same thing about black holes. He said they're, mathematically speaking, there's this peculiar phenomena where they collapse so much down that there's more inside than there is on the outside, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and now when you're talking about Shelley Trimmer, because you have a book called Infinity of the Gods, and and I believe that's concerned. I haven't read that one yet, but it's.
I recommend it.
Yeah, it seems very interesting, and definitely one that I'm going to check out. But before we get into that, I would like to jump into, and I got my co-host here, Alexandria, and so she's here too. And I know I'm excited about talking to you, so I might be taking up a little bit of time here. But I would really like to ask you about what had, in all your years of research, what can you tell us about Stargates?
Well, you see, the book isn't Stargates in the conventional sense. I start with that because in the movie Stargate that came out in '94, it was about a portal through which people could pass in a quick way to other points in space and possibly time, I suppose. And what I was talking about, I was using that as a metaphor because that movie came out at a very powerful time. The early '90s was when there was a major planetary configuration. And I was likening these planetary configurations like the Uranus-Neptune in early '90s or the Uranus-Pluto in the '60s. It's almost as though they open up a doorway into other states of consciousness. And you see around these times, such as the early '90s, I remember there was a lot of talk about esoteric topics. There was a lot of talk sponsored by the Institute of Noetic Sciences, in fact, in California, about communicating with the dead via technology, and channeling was a big phenomenon. Some of this stuff was legit, some wasn't so legit. But the point is that I wasn't thinking so much about physical stargates, like the movie was talking about. I was using it as a metaphor to talk about, well, temporal stargates, but also this idea that there are times, I've been around long enough to see how the energies play out astrologically. And I've seen how at certain times, it's as though the veil thins. And people are able to pick up things, ideas, feelings, inventions, works of art that they normally don't have access to. Do you follow what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I do. And I noticed that in the book, because you talk about, so you're saying a thinning of the veil before I get into what I was going to say.
Right.
I know that a lot of people will say, let's take, for instance, I spoke to this one gentleman who said he was riding down the road and it seemed like he went into another dimension, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so, so I understand the thinning of the veil. And
this can happen on an individual level, and it's happened to me once where I was with some people driving down a road in the mountains of Colorado, and we saw a big black dog cross the road. And this is a very remote area, and we thought, that's kind of odd seeing a dog here. Then we saw it disappear into the side of a mountain, and we were baffled. There were four of us in the car. We looked at each other. My partner sitting next to me had been a psychologist and was a pretty keen observer, and we stopped the car. We looked. There was nowhere the dog could have gone to. And in this next book I'm working on, it'll be out sometime in the next 6 months probably, I talk about anomalies, and I talk about when things like this happen, there's a term in Greek, kairos, K-A-I-R-O-S, like these sacred moments in time, or these powerful moments in time where an individual can experience a time slip. There's quite a bit of writing on this notion of someone can be driving down the road, or like this couple that was traveling through Europe, and they stayed in an inn that they couldn't find after that. Everybody was dressed in old garb, and they'd spoken a strange, kind of old dialect, and when they went back to find the place the next day, they couldn't find it. And these things can happen on a cultural level too, I think, and you look at the times historically when there are anomalies. Like I've done a lot of research on the mid-'60s, and you look at the way that UFOs and Bigfoot and all these different anomalous topics came up. It was like the thinning of the veil when those topics become very powerful, and so it happens to people. It can happen to masses of society.
I was going to ask you, Ray, myself being a historian, and I know I personally became fascinated with astrology because I had a family member that had worked in Egypt in the 1920s with the tombs and stuff, and hearing stories about Egypt and all that, it sort of really whetted my appetite for astrology and, mysteries that are still unsolved. Was there, because I know it does say that you've worked for over 30 years and you're an internationally known astrologer. Was there something in your life, one point in your life that you decided that astrology was important? Was there one particular incident, or you've always had a fascination with astrology?
I had an interest in it in my teens simply because it was in the air. This was in the 60s, mind you. And so you would hear, the song, This is the Dawning of the Age of Aquarius, and you would see movie stars come on the Tonight Show and talk about their sun sign or something like that. So it was in the air. It wasn't some unknown commodity. And I read a book in my teens by an author named Joseph Godovich called Astrology, the Space Age Science, I think it was called. But it wasn't until I was in college, I was a junior, maybe I was a senior in college at a Columbia College in Chicago, not Columbia University. And there was a teacher that was teaching that had a background at the University of Chicago. She had not studied with, but taught alongside some of the world's great intellectuals like James Hillman and Mircea Eliade and people like that, Paul Ricoeur. And I was very intrigued that they would offer this class, which they only did, I think, for 2 years, and I took the course. And I was blown away. This woman was a profound astrologer, very intuitive, Scorpio. And that really started it. And then I was studying as well with the yogi in Chicago, Kriyananda, and a Chicago-born yogi. And he kind of took me over the next 15 years into what he knew about astrology. So it snowballed. It started really with that class at Columbia College in Chicago and snowballed to where, I became heavily involved in it.
That's fascinating, because I know a lot of another statement, maybe you can kind of comment on it. It seems like, even years and years ago, knowledge or stuff about astrology or great mysteries, we had more knowledge back then, and this is just my opinion, we've sort of lost our way, or that knowledge or astrology, or because I myself have been to Stonehenge a couple of times, and just the feeling that you get of greatness, of knowledge from the past, and I think a lot of people are now searching for that now, and I don't know if you had a comment on that.
Well, it's been a trade-off, and what I mean by that is that we've definitely lost something. And I just posted on social media this morning something about Egypt and the Great Pyramid, and if you spend time in or around the Giza Plateau, and especially inside the Great Pyramid, you realize there was something very mysterious about these individuals building these monuments. And I don't want to get into the fringe category here about UFOs building the pyramids and all that. That's not my point. Not that I'm not saying it is or isn't true, but that's not where I'm going with this. The thing is, there was definitely a level of knowledge about the mysteries and about the hidden side of nature and of human nature, and we've lost that. At the same time, we now have access to all these world traditions, even if we don't know everything about them. I feel very fortunate to be alive at this time in history, because I can go online and look up information that someone would have traveled to Tibet to back in the 1800s to try to find. And nowadays there's a wealth of this information, almost too much. It's a glut of information. But I think that we're very privileged to have access to so many different bodies of information and knowledge now that they didn't have in the old days. So that's what I mean by a trade-off.
Right.
And in the book Stargates, you talk about the United States return to Pluto. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, I just gave a lecture last Thursday at the Theosophical Society here in Wheaton on that. It's online. It's on YouTube, where America is undergoing its first Pluto return since 1776. Now, everybody knows the notion of planetary returns, whether they know it or not, because we celebrate birthdays. That's where the sun, and that's not a planet, I realize that, but that's where the sun returns to the position it was at when you were born. Well, all the planets come around and make cycles like that. Pluto, though, is very long. It's 240-some years. So right now, we're coming into the first return of Pluto to its birth position. Now, what does Pluto mean? Pluto is death, rebirth, it's transformation, it's the underworld, etc. And so America is going through this kind of descent into the underworld, you might say. It's that's not all good, it's not all bad. I think it's easy to get scared by these, but England's been through 3 Pluto returns. Ancient Rome has been through 2. And you usually see, like I list in the article I wrote, well, that's the chapter in my book, I put it in the book as well, the article, about there are several things to look for with the Pluto return, I think. And I mentioned how when I wrote this last year, when the economy is doing well, I said it could be economic upheaval. I said there could be a great deal of civil unrest, bordering on a civil war type situation. I mentioned environmental issues and so on. So there's not you can't with astrology predict too specifically. We don't know exactly how it's going to be any more than, let's say, that the third Pluto return for England wasn't the same exactly as the second or the first, but there are certain commonalities. It's like the old line about history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And so you see these sort of repeating symbolic archetypal patterns. But this is the first one for the U.S., so we're kind of entering into uncharted territory other than to look at previous Pluto returns of other nations.
Well, how did England going through 3 of them, how did they affect England, the 3?
Well, for example, each time you had a Pluto return, there was some very profound shift in the culture. For example, the second Pluto return was when Queen Elizabeth came in, and it was Elizabeth I, and there was the Elizabethan era, the golden age, so to speak, but it was also the inauguration of the English slave trade. And then under the third Pluto return, you had the cessation, the ending of the slave trade, but also the Industrial Revolution. You had, it was kind of the dying of the English Empire in a way, even though that happened during that entire period. But there tends to be upheaval. There tends to be, like in the second and the first Pluto return, you had the battle of Catholics and Protestants. I don't remember if that was as much during the third Pluto return, but the point is that there tends to be this deep-seated sort of upheaval or change or re-examination of values, of social direction, that sort of thing. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Press me if you need me to.
Yeah, actually, you're clarifying it, because the United States is actually going through a lot of craziness right now. And I'll tell you, yeah, there's a lot of insanity going on in the U.S. right now. And I'll tell you that I would be curious as to how do we know, because we're talking about England and Rome, how do we know that the Pluto return is for the United States this time? How is that determined?
Wait, I missed the, how do we know it's what for the United States? I didn't hear that.
How do we know that, like, for the United States, you said it happens every 247 years or whatever?
Right.
How do we know that it's for the U.S. this time? What determines that, I guess?
Yeah, you look at the horoscope for July 4th, 1776. Or any time during that first week. Different astrologers have different opinions about when some astrologers say the U.S. was really born on July 2nd, etc. But in general, Pluto moves so slowly it doesn't make much difference. It's still a around the same degree in that birth chart for early July of 1776. So then you follow, when does it come back to that place in Capricorn? Because it was in late degrees of Capricorn back in 1776. And so you look to see when it comes back around again to that point. That's the return. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that clarified that for me. I was a little, I didn't understand it. Now I do.
It's like your birthday. You know, how do you determine a birthday? Well, it's not just on the calendar. It's when the sun comes back around to that same point in space.
And I know that there's been a lot of controversy with Pluto. Like when I went through school, Pluto was a planet, and now I suppose it's not a planet, which kind of is, I don't know. But it's a little they saying it's not a planet now. What you think of that?
Well, it is a planet because I've seen it up. I mean, whether it's technically a planet, a rose by any other name, that Shakespeare line, it still has a powerful impact in the horoscope. And that's something I've seen time and again, where regardless of what label you give it, a planet, a planetoid, whatever, a dwarf planet, I'm not sure what some of the astronomers call it, but it definitely has an impact. And even though it's not large, the analogy I used once in an interview was, who was more powerful, Napoleon or Arnold Schwarzenegger? Schwarzenegger was bigger, but and Napoleon was a relatively small fellow. But size isn't everything. There's other factors, and I think that the fact that Pluto is so small, I don't think makes all that big of a difference in terms of its impact on the horoscope.
Yeah, for the people listening out there, I want them to be clear that they can learn about all this in your book Stargates. And one of the other things you talk about in Stargates is the planet X. Now, I've heard that the planet X is very similar to the Earth. Is that true?
Well, no, they don't know anything about planet X. They just calculate using mathematics, kind of like they did with Neptune when they discovered Neptune. It wasn't through visual observation like with Uranus. It was through mathematical calculations and looking at the gravitational pull of other visible bodies. So we don't exactly know for sure where planet X is. There's even doubt as to whether it does exist. There's many different controversies about this. But I do think there's another planet out there. We don't know whether it would be similar to Earth. It's unlikely that it would be because it would be so far out in space, there'd be so little light and so little heat that it wouldn't sustain life. It wouldn't be like the Earth. We're the only planet in the solar system that has large bodies of water. So there's various factors, but we can figure out what it means, this new planet, when we discover it by various methods, such as looking at what's in the news around that time synchronistically, following it, tracking it in the charts of horoscopes of people. But it tends to be whenever there's a major planet, whenever there's a large planetary discovery versus, let's say, an asteroid or something like that, it tends to signify a new state of consciousness coming into the collective awareness. And so when Uranus was discovered, you saw certain things happen. When Neptune was discovered, you saw certain things unfold. And likewise with Pluto, and I think the planet X, if it happens, it's going to be a major transition point in society in some fashion.
Yeah, and like I said, I've heard so many different things about it. I even listened to this guy talk for 30 minutes one day, and he was trying to tell everybody how it's so much like Earth. And so, yeah, and like you said, nobody really knows.
Well, it really wouldn't be like Earth in terms of, maybe he meant it in a different sense than I'm understanding. But, it could be the same size as the Earth, although I think they said it would be much bigger based on the gravitational pulls. But the odds of it being anything like Earth would be very slim. Now, mind you, there are people that talk about solar systems out there where there are Earth-like planets. Now, that's a whole different topic, but it is entirely possible there are many Earths out there in space. The odds of there being millions, if not billions, of habitable planets in the universe is very, very high.
Yeah.
Good. The odds are good.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just reading too when I was doing some research, and this is how you summed up your philosophy. And you said the horoscope is a symbolic map of an individual's soul and destiny based on the study of the heavens at the moment of birth. And understanding this map provides an opportunity to better understand both strengths and weaknesses, and to learn the right timing for all major activities. And what comes to mind when I read that statement, because I'm a huge I sort of not a fan, for a lack of a better word, is that Dr. John Dee, when he was assisting Elizabeth I in, you know, the power struggles that were going on at that particular time, and that's what came to mind when I read that statement, is John Dee and doing his work to kind of be a spiritual or astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I.
Yeah, in fact, it's funny you bring that up, because just last Thursday I flashed a painting of John Dee in my lecture in association with the reign of Elizabeth I. And I do think that's the occult side of a Pluto return. I think that there's a lot of problems with something like a Pluto return. There's also a lot of gifts, and that involves, to some extent, you know, occult knowledge, mystical knowledge. So this could be a time that the U.S. is moving into a period when we're going to be dealing with a lot of challenges, but I think it's also a time when it could be a very rich period in terms of knowledge and occult wisdom.
Let me ask you something. You're talking about, too, sacred psychology. Could you explain that to us?
Well, sacred psychology is the notion that the human psyche isn't just a matter of hormonal juices and synapses in a physical meat body. It's about archetypal principles. It's about, when someone falls in love. I go into this a fair amount in my first book, The Waking Dream. The idea that I also go into this in a few other places, but the point is that when you feel, let's say, love, it's not just an activation of hormones and bodily secretions. It's about you're tapping into the archetype of Venus, you might say. You're being possessed by the god Aphrodite, so to speak. And I say that with a lot of qualifications. When I say possessed, I mean, love is a form of possession. I think that's pretty obvious. But the point, or like when you feel a state of anger, that's the god Mars that is kind of inhabiting your psyche. These are universal principles. They're archetypal principles. They're not merely, there's a saying in reductionistic science, that's nothing but. Well, archetypal psychology says we're more than just, physical bodies. We're an assemblage of spiritual principles, archetypal principles. You can get into the chakras there if you want to, because the chakras are a reflection of your horoscope. The way the planets were outside of you at the moment you were born reflects the way your chakras are configured inside of you.
Wow, that's interesting.
Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah. I was letting you go there because I think everybody it really could understand what you were saying there. It's
well, for example, today I did a chart. I just got off the phone right before we spoke with a client in India. And this person was a double Taurus, a very strong Venus in his chart. So he resonates to the archetype of Venus, which is love, it's beauty, it's a certain kind of comfort, it can be money. And so you can tell from someone's chart which of the archetypal principles kind of guide their life. I was almost going to say run their life. You can be either controlled by your horoscope or you can control the horoscope. You can either be in charge of the archetypes or they can control you. And I think that that's part of the reason it's valuable to understand subjects like astrology or the chakras, because if you don't understand them, to the degree you don't understand them, to that degree you're kind of controlled by them. And so there's a free will component involved in astrology, in my opinion.
And I want to go back a little bit to something that you said earlier about communicating with the dead and stuff like that, or the spirit world. We do paranormal research. We've been doing it for a long time. Uh, but one of the locations, I'm assuming you know who MUFON is, right?
Yeah, I have quite a story about them, which we don't have time for, but go on.
The footage that we recovered at one of the locations was a winged creature flying downstairs, and at the time, as a paranormal researcher, I was just wanting to label it as demonic or whatever. Well, I had somebody at MUFON look at it, and they were telling me that it was an interdimensional traveler, and actually they showed me a cave painting from, I don't know how, it was years and years and years ago, probably over 1,000 years ago, where there's a painting on the wall of this exact thing that we captured on film. And that's how I started really researching interdimensional travelers. And I was kind of trying to get your input on what do you think about interdimensional travelers?
Well, I think it's absolutely, possible, and I think it's quite evident that many of the paranormal stories that you hear about or that you might experience yourself are likely interdimensional. The dog that I saw on the road in Colorado disappeared into thin air. Now, what was it? And likewise, you have these very strange stories of people finding Bigfoot tracks that go out into the snow and then they disappear. They stop at a certain point. Nick Redfern has written, I think, quite a lot about these sorts of things. Or likewise, the Men in Black, they don't seem to be quite fully physical. They certainly don't seem to be human. They seem very odd. I think that one of the major discoveries that's down the road for science is the discovery of other dimensions. There's already theories about this. It's something that's talked about a lot more these days, but I think it actually will be a discovery. There have been these revolutions in science over the years, like Copernicus. We discovered the Earth wasn't the center. With Freud, we discovered the conscious mind wasn't the center, so to speak. With Darwin, we discovered humans weren't really the center of existence from a biological standpoint. And likewise, I think the next major decentralization is probably going to be discovering that there are it could be that there are other physical universes, or it could be that we're going to discover other dimensions, or it could be both. And of course, one of the major theories associated with UFOs is that they could be interdimensional travelers, which is possible. I think it could be all of the above. I think the UFOs could be nuts and bolts crafts from other parts of the universe, but there could be UFOs that are interdimensional or even archetypal.
Well, even if you look at the Old Testament Bible where they talk about the flying objects and stuff like that, I mean, that could go back to what we think of as, it would be called an unidentified flying object, right? A UFO.
Right.
But do you got the short version of the MUFON story? Because I've only dealt with them one time. And they looked at that footage. That's the only experience I have with MUFON, so I don't know a whole lot about them other than that.
Now, I've got two stories. One is long and one is short, so I'll tell you the short one. And by the way, I would like you to send me that photo if you care to, that you're talking about. That sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Back in around 1990, the crop circle phenomena was getting big in England, but it hadn't made it big over here yet. And my friend Tom Stoltz, who's now dead, he was the head of Illinois MUFON. And I became good friends with him, and he took me down into his basement once and showed me weird artifacts like angel hair inside of the so-called angel hair from the 50s inside of a jar, and he had videos that had never been made public of really weird things. But he took me out. The members of the group in a local suburb here were all very professional, college-educated people in that MUFON group, and they said that there was a private pilot had spotted a crop circle in the forest preserve outside of Argonne Laboratories, south of Chicago. And so we drove out there in winter, and it was icy, and there was 5 inches of water, and we trudged out there, and we examined the crop circle. It was the first one, apparently, that had been found in America, in the U.S. And they didn't finally make a big deal out of it because they thought the ground might have been contaminated when they took soil samples. But it was in a very remote area where no one would be inclined to hoax anything. And there were some anomalous findings on the radioactivity meters that they had, but that could have been related to the Argonne laboratory. We don't know. But so it was the first major crop circle, or the first crop circle I'm aware of, that had been seen in the U.S. back around 1990.
Wow.
But there was another story that was much more bizarre than that, which I don't have it. That would take me 10 minutes to relate, so I'm not going to go into that one.
Okay. Well, maybe on a future show when we have you back, that we could get into that one. But I actually have several different. We have several different photographs and actual video. The actual video I want to send you, because I'll send you that one that I showed MUFON, but I'm going to send you some other ones too, and I want to kind of get your opinion on them, because they're these white, it looks like huge orbs, but as they come into the camera, clearly you can see them morphing. You can see the face forming and all that. So I haven't took that to MUFON yet, but I would like for you to take a look at that.
That sounds interesting. Well, just yesterday I was looking at, if you know the work of Linda Moulton Howe, she's got a website called earthfiles.com. It's spelled like it sounds. And she has a new item up there about a very strange orb-like thing that a guy photographed on a security camera inside his house. And it's not a normal kind of orb like I posted this morning on Facebook from the bottom underneath the Great Pyramid. But this was kind of oval shape, and it was quite unusual, and it set off an alarm inside the motion detection alarm in the house, which means it probably was not just an optical anomaly in the camera. So there's a lot of interesting research out there. I tend to take a skeptical view on a lot of what I see. Not debunking. I just, a lot of it you just can't prove either way, and other times it's quite compelling.
Yeah, because it did say that you have a degree in filmmaking from the Art Institute of Chicago. Have you made any films, or what have you done in that respect? Because I
made several experimental short films, because my degree was in experimental film. I studied with the brilliant fellow named Stan Brakhage, who's not well known, but he was a big mover and shaker in the independent film field. And so I worked in experimental film, and I only have one of those films up on YouTube. It's called Awakening 3, Roman numeral 3. And it's hard to track down, but it is there. It's a short, I think it's like 4 or 5 minutes. But that was it, and I more or less morphed into photography. I don't shoot films. It was too laborious and time-consuming to edit on your own. I mean, it took me years to finish this one, few-minute film. But now I do a lot of photography, and I try to convey a lot of the same aesthetic that I did with my filmmaking. I have a photography site, raygrassephotography.com, where you can go see those images.
I mean, you've also said that you've completed a music CD titled "The Sea Within." Could you tell our listeners a bit about that?
Yeah, it's some of the clips are on YouTube. I put videos. I put visual accompaniment to some of those pieces of music, but on my website, on raygrasse.com, which is a different website, I have one of the tabs leads to music, and that has a link to the music CD I did. That was more so my kind of impressionistic classical mode, like I'm very influenced by Debussy and Ravel. My other music, I'm working on another CD that's more blues and rock oriented. It's two very different styles.
Now, out of all the books you've written, for the audience listening, where's the best place? Because I know they're on Amazon, but where's the best place that they can purchase them? And the second part to that question would be, out of all your books, what is your favorite?
Well, that's a good question. It's not I don't have an easy answer, but the first part of your question, I'd recommend people start with The Waking Dream, which is the first book, because that goes into, it's not strictly astrological. It goes into the symbolic and synchronistic dimensions of everyday life. And so that's kind of the ground floor of my work. And then I highly recommend the book, The Infinity of God, An Infinity of Gods, because that teacher that I studied with, who was a disciple or a student of Yogananda's back in the 30s and 40s, he was a very profound and very mysterious occultist and mystic Shelley Trimmer. And the book is a series of my conversations with him, and I think that's probably my most important book. If someone said, you can leave one book behind and all the others are going to be burned or something, I would probably say The Infinity of Gods would be the main one. Now, I am coming out with this other book in the next maybe 6 months called The Sky Stretched Out Before Me, which is more of an autobiographical book, which will also be a good ground level book because it'll give a sense of how I got into this and all that. But that's what I would say in answer to your question. My favorite book would probably be either The Waking Dream or An Infinity of Gods, but it's Sophie's choice. I don't think I can pick between one or the other.
Well, let me ask you another question here, because you've been doing astrology for quite some time. What is the most unusual thing that you've discovered in your research of astrology that really stuck out for you? That's that aha moment?
The aha moment came early on when, how do you explain that someone, like an astrologer looks at a chart and sees, let's say, I remember once listening to this Swami that I studied with, and he was talking about their chart, and they had like Jupiter and Leo in the 9th house, and he said, you probably have, good luck in France. If you traveled, you should go to France. Well, the guy he was kind of shocked by this because he had spent time in France, and that was his main hub overseas. And I thought, wait a second, now, how does this position of Jupiter in the sky relate to someone's life? And that started a ball rolling in terms of all these bizarre synchronicities and something the occultists call the theory of correspondences. Things are linked in subtle ways. Like, how is it that Neptune rules oil, it rules the ocean, it rules the feet, it rules fish, etc., etc.? There are these bizarre symbolic linkages between phenomena that make no sense at all from a purely scientific, materialistic standpoint. And it shows there's a whole different dimension to the world than we realize. And for me, that was the aha moment. And it also showed the fact that something would happen in my life, like the time I was in Manhattan and my car got broken into and I had one of my manuscripts basically stolen with all my other belongings. And I looked at the horoscope, and Saturn was affecting my Mercury, which was a perfect expression of that. Now, how is it that planetary positions out in deep space would relate to things that happen in my everyday practical life? It made no sense from the standpoint of materialistic science, but it really did show there is this whole symbolic dimension to the world that we've ignored.
Now, I noticed in here you've talked a lot about horoscopes, and do you have a source for horoscopes that people can go to? Because one thing I've noticed is it can be the same day, the same year. You go and you check 2 different horoscopes, and they may say something different. Can you tell me a reliable source to view a horoscope?
The only reliable source to view a horoscope is a reliable astrologer. You can't really get it. You can get some information from computer printouts, for example, and there will be some differences between the different astrologers looking at a horoscope. But generally speaking, presuming they're not from completely different traditions like the Chinese versus, modern Western, there are going to be a lot of commonalities between the interpretations. And if you can find a good astrologer, that really is the way to go with that. There's no website you can go to really get a good reading of your horoscope, unless you pay for a good printout like Liz Green's system is fairly good. But it takes a human mind to integrate the elements of the horoscope. You tend to get more of a piecemeal thing with the computer printout, whereas the human element can take those disparate bits of information and tie them together into a whole horoscope.
Right, and I like how what you wrote on October 7th, and you were talking about the cluster effect when the planetary triggers kind of converge, and I like the statement where it says, as astrologers, we carefully chart the celestial weather at any given time, and I like the wording of astrological perfect storms.
Yeah, and we've got this in that same chapter I talk about, I believe, we're coming up to one right now, which is December 20th, 21st in that ballpark. You could give it a window, talk about maybe December 18th up to the 23rd. There's several things converging around the same time. There's the Jupiter conjunct Saturn in Aquarius. There's the winter solstice. There's Trump's horoscope is being triggered very strongly at that time. Then we've got Mars is going to be forming an angle to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction from last January. There's 3 or 4 things happening within a 48-hour period. And I pay a lot of attention to those because of there's that much more power. They tend to be trigger times when you see tectonic shifts in the culture. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. Like the one that happened in January of this year, I wrote about that months in advance, saying that something is going on in January that's going to have long-lasting impact. I didn't predict a pandemic, but I did think that it was going to be an economic shakeup. I did think that 2020 was going to be a big game changer for a lot of people. So you can't necessarily predict, like I said before, the fine details of what's going to happen, but you can certainly get the timing.
Right.
And speaking of which, we this Halloween we had a actual, what was it, the blue moon or the red moon?
Blue moon.
The blue moon this Halloween. What is your opinion on that, and what does that mean really?
Well, the blue moon is I'm forgetting some of the astronomical details of that, but it's not really that significant from an astrological standpoint. Some full moons are definitely more powerful than others because of, let's say, how close the moon is to the Earth, or that's whether it's an eclipse, etc. Full moons, in general, unless they're eclipses of the moon, tend not to be, well, they're important, but you have to see it in the context of everything else that's going on. There's been a lot going on in September and October in particular because of some of the planetary things happening. But you have to take every element on its own basis. You have to see it in context. So a given full moon, 1 month might do relatively little, but then you might have a full moon where the full moon is conjuncting Mars or Jupiter, in which case it takes on a lot more power.
Wow. And you were talking about, going back to what you said about last January with the predictions of something that's going to shake up the economy and stuff like that. Are you seeing anything for this coming January?
Well, January is pretty, I'd say starting around December, maybe, 15th or so, running all the way up through January, there's a lot of changes. And I would say this whether there was going to be an inauguration. Presumably there's going to be an inauguration. But there's a lot going on in the stars from late December through January, and it's somewhat turbulent. And especially, I'd say, that third week of December. But then again, you've got in January, you've got the Uranus changing directions, and there's other things. The inauguration chart is very intense. If you do a chart for, I guess it's noon of January 20th, I forget the exact timing on that. But so it's an upheaval period, and I think the United States is, in generally speaking, in an upheaval period the next few years. But, it's never all good or all bad. It's like the second Pluto return for England gave us the golden age of Elizabethan England, but it also gave us the slave trade, for England. So you have to be able to see the good and the bad of these things, not just one or the other.
And I wanted to ask you a question on what your thought or what you feel of in Canada. We always grew up. I remember my grandfather. He had the Farmer's Almanac, and I'm looking at an almanac for 2020, and of course they give you. This one I'm looking at in particular was first published in 1807, and a lot of people use these almanacs religiously because it gives you, again, like you said, eclipses, and some of them even gives you times for all the planets. This one even has a fishing calendar on when to fish. What's your thought on almanacs?
Well, there's a signal to noise ratio there, in the sense that they do list some very important things, moon cycles, certain planetary cycles. It's not as elaborate as some of the astrological almanacs, but it's useful, especially for a farmer, knowing when the moon phases are. And been a year since I've looked at, let's say, a farmer's almanac, but in general, they're astronomically pretty accurate. They're whatever interpretations they layer onto that. I can't speak to that, but they're basically reasonable astronomical almanacs.
Absolutely.
And it's because we're running a little out of time, and I know we could probably talk to you for hours because you're a very interesting guest, and there's a lot we can learn from you for sure. But we're winding down on the time here, and I was kind of wondering, is there anything that you would like to say to the folks out there that's listening to the show as we wrap up here?
Well, that's a good question too. I'm not sure there's a simple answer, but I would say just because I come from where I'm coming from, I hope people will check out at least two of those books of mine, which are The Waking Dream and Infinity of Gods, because I put a lot of years into both of those. I think that they can be portals to, a book can become a portal, sometimes a black hole, but some books can be portals into different ways of seeing the world, and that's what I try to do with my books.
Yeah, well, we're going to put a link in the description of the show. There's always a description. We'll put a link to your books in there. And actually, I don't know if you have a link. Is the CD, is it for sale, or is that just something that you've done for yourself?
It is for sale through, you can access it through CD Baby, or I forget the other one. But the link to that, I believe, is on my website under one of the tabs that says, I believe it's Other. It's the far tab on the right at the top of my raygrasse.com page. And
we'll definitely link your website to the description as well. But yeah, I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll invite you back again, and hopefully have a longer conversation on just one thing. We kind of have a lot of different questions for you at this point, since this is the first time you joined us. But so we just touching the surface on a lot of this stuff.
We don't want to, because a lot of times listeners get overwhelmed, and I think we could talk to you for hours. I mean, I could discuss things on symbolism and stuff like that, but it's just it sort of gives the listeners a little bit of information where we encourage them to do further investigation on you and exactly what you do, and of course purchase your books to sort of, because the way I look at it is that I think people are always seeking answers or direction in their life, and I think we could, like I said, we could talk to you for hours on different topics about horoscopes, astronomy.
And speaking of symbolism, you got a book out called Signs of Times, and you were talking about it.
That's about the Aquarian Age.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You were talking about the Aquarian Age, and that's another book that I'm gonna. I don't think you recommended it right here, right? But I'm gonna recommend it.
Well, thank you. I would recommend it, but if you asked me to prioritize, I'd go with those other two probably. That's all.
Yeah. Well, I think all of them are very interesting, and so yeah, we appreciate you joining the show, and
check out that thing I posted on Facebook today of the orbs. Jury is out for me as far as the orbs go in photographs, but check out the photograph I took underneath the pyramid. There's a pit way 200 feet down beneath the Great Pyramid, and I was in there taking photographs, and I caught these things, and the jury's open for me. But I do think it's interesting that I captured this on camera.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll definitely check it out, and it'll be Friday too. I'm gonna send you a video link and some pictures with the orbs, but actual video, so you can see the orbs actually manifesting. And
that'd be great. Thank you.
I'd like to get your opinion on those, but yeah.
Oh, I'd like to see it. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it, and we look forward to getting the show out and having you back in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Nice talking to both of you.
Yeah, take care and have a great day. Thank you very much.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.